we're not really sure what we're going to do to make it happen. And that got me to thinking and saying, you know what, this really starts with a budget plan. And that's the detail of what you're going to sell. And the bottom line of that will be is to achieve the goals and how it breaks down. So in other words, how many widgets are you going to sell to who to get to the target you're actually going to, rather than the typical 90-day plan, which would be sales, I've got to sell this much to achieve our goal. So this is kind of the breakdown, which I thought I'd try and formalize this. And that's really where this has come from today, to creating a budget plan. It defines what you do to make your goals targets that you've actually set yourself. So, whoops, sorry about that. So let's start with what actually do we do with the budget plan? Well, we start off initially with the goal. The goal would come out of your long-term goals, your 12-month goals into quarters, excuse me, into a quarter, and come down to whatever you're doing the budget plan period over. So typically you would create a budget plan for a year, would be what most people would do, and then they would create a 12-month plan running alongside it. So the goal would come off the 12-month plan, which would then say, right, how are we going to achieve those requirements of that goal? It defines what we plan to do to meet that goal. So like I said, how many widgets you're going to make, who's going to do what. It's then used to create the sales target for the period. Now, I'll come back to this later, but these two usually aren't the same thing, and there's a good reason for that, and I'll come back to that when we get to it. I tried to think of simple ways of describing this, and the best ones I can come up with, most people are familiar with a cash flow forecast and cash flow, what's going to actually happen in the past and how it's going in the future. So it's like a cash flow, but it's going into the future. You're predicting what's going to happen with your best judgments. So your best ideas are what you're actually taking, and you're adding detail to define the 90-day plan from it. And that's the starting point that I'm coming from here. The key question though is what makes up a budget plan? And simplistically, I divide this into two things: ongoing sales and expenditure of existing products, and planned sales and expenditure of new products, products being services, etc. So if I represent this graphically, if we do a simple chart, well, this would be sales, which we call money, and this would be time. If you've got existing product, and let's say this is the period that we're going to work over, okay, and sorry, this is the previous period, and this is the period we're going to work over in here. And your existing product has been doing that, and it's been growing. That's great. There's every assumption could be made without any other extra information, is it's going to keep going like that. So the easy one is to take the previous period and then extrapolate that forward. So the first thing you can do is say, well, look, we're on a growth trajectory, 10% a year or whatever. If we continue that next year, that will be our base point. And obviously, if you're going to do more things to promote it, then the next thing that people typically do is to try and make it do that. That's the second stage. But there is, of course, the new products. And the new products are going to be more tricky. Because if we assume that your new product's going to start from the beginning of the year, you're going to do lots of preparation work. And that preparation work is going to be sorting out your marketing, it's going to be the image, you're going to get it out to various people to look at it, they've got to consider it before they buy it. So what would generally happen is it will look something like this. And what we're actually looking at is exponential growth. And eventually, as that goes into the future, that will tail off because you reach the end of the cycle. So we'll come back to that in a moment. So we've got to try and work out what we're going to put in as realistic figures for a new product. But that will be the sort of thing that we're looking at there. Oh, sorry for getting a new clicker on this. The other thing then is to look at external impacts on what's going to affect you. Are there any market events that will impact your numbers? A typical thing will be COVID. It could be competitors launching new products. Are you launching any new product ranges, or are your competitors launching any different ranges that could compete with you? And of course, the impact of inflation. So at the moment, our inflation rates are quite low. But if you think about it, if inflation is running at 3%, if you don't increase your sales by 3%, you're actually contracting. So the very minimum you need to do is to put inflation on there to get a realistic comparison before you start to say, well, actually, are we going to grow? Because 3% growth at this point in time won't be growth. And given what's happening with pricing and things, it's probably going to be a lot more aggressive than that 3% over the next year. But we've always got to wait and see how that works out. What are the overall changes in sales and costs expected over the budget period? That's the underlying question we're answering. But what you need to do is to go back and justify that to yourself. Because it's very easy, a bit like we've been kicking around things and I've given my opinion on what I think is going to happen. It's only an opinion. If you're going to steer your business based on a hunch, which is what it comes down to, that can be risky. So think about how you can put some meat on the bones and justify that. What are you going to give the firmest possible image that you can come up with to actually work with? And it's so easy to end up with being overly aggressive. There's nothing worse than being actually under aggressive, but classic situation that I've been in myself is the company accountant decides that the company is going to grow by 15% in the next 12 months. No correlation to what the impact of marketing or sales. He's just decided that that's what the goal of the company is. So what's the investment you're going to put into the marketing? What's the training and the new product changes you're going to put into the sales department to make them more able to sell to more people? These are all impacts that you need to think about when you're going through this equation. So what's actually happening with your existing products? Are they growing or are they shrinking? So let's take an example. A typical life expectancy of a product is this. It will start off and it will grow and you will get your exponential curve. Then it will start to tail off and then it will decline again. And this would be a life cycle of a product. So this bit here, you're trying to educate the market that it exists and what the benefits are. This bit here, you're capitalizing on it. And this bit here, you're just getting the last eggs out of the money you can make, while the competitors generally come in and do Me Too marketing as far as you're concerned. So if you're a leading edge company, you'll be working on this side. If you're a Me Too company, you'll be working on this side to help get the dregs out of the product, compete with people who've already done the work of designing it. What we're looking to do is to decide on a realistic uplift on last year. And you can easily sort of, people will typically say, oh, we'll make it 10%. Just make sure that makes sense. Talk to the people in the know, like the sales department. What do they think about an uplift of 10%? How buoyant is the market? Is that realistic? The new product side, it's so easy to think that you're going to come in with a new product and you're going to get instant success. So again, you will get a situation where people will say, right, okay, new product's going to launch to market, it's going to do that. There is 1 in a sort of chance in 100 that you might do that. You might come up with something the market is screaming for, but actually the chances are extremely minimal you're going to do that. At best, it's going to do that. So when you're planning your year, what you need to do is to start off with minimal impact at the start of the year and ramp it up as you go through. Otherwise, you'll end up with something which is over-optimistic. So try and avoid the linear growth model because it's unlikely to be true. So there we are at the moment then. We're going to create the budget plan. How are we going to go about creating the budget plan? So we have the goal that we've set. So this is where we've set for the company goal. The company is going to do this much growth for the period. What we need to do then is to work out how much of our existing business we're going to scale, because it's hopefully growing, and how much of that will account for it. And in most cases, that will be most of that goal. It's the cream on the top which is going to allow for you to make that bit of difference. The second thing we then need to do is to think about the seasonal changes. So if you've got a seasonal business, we need to then reflect that as the next stage. So if I give you an idea of this way, if we've got same chart as we've been using, so it's money against time, and we look at it and say, right, okay, our existing product is doing that. We're going to do a new product, and we're going to overlay this on the top. So it's going to do very little to start with, and then it's going to start to go up. So actually, we're going to say it's there. But then we have to think about the seasonal effect. So we can say, right, this is the impact over the year. But if we broke down the percentage of sales in each month through the year, and we then divided this up across the year, we may find that we have to end up with something which goes like this. So the average is the same, but this is more realistic. And it's balancing those things together to give you something that's useful. What we're looking to achieve is something like this. And I'm not expecting you to see the numbers or any of the detail in this, but in essence, we have a month by month input. And for each of these, we have the top half is money coming in, sales, and the bottom half is expenditure. So this is your overheads, your rent, buying your materials, etc. So for each month, it's quite common to put last year's figures in there because that gives you a benchmark. Each month, you then put your new target and you put the sales figures you're actually looking to achieve, and then you put the cost in the bottom here, and hopefully what you end up in the bottom here is profits and what profits you expect to achieve. Now, in reality, if you're doing a big product launch or a new business type set up, you won't necessarily expect profits in the early stages. So I say profits with a question mark. That's where you should actually see, and this is where you're coming back to your plan as to what you expect to achieve. So this would be, to me, whatever layout you choose to use, what works for you, this would be the starting point for who's going to sell what. So let's put this into connotation for you. If you've got a range of products, A, B, C, D, some of those will be more profitable, some of those will be easier to sell. If you've got those 4 products and you're going to grow, which ones of those are going to grow? Which ones will remain where they are, perhaps? Which ones may actually be in their the tail end of their life cycle and be reducing? So you add that variability into those products. That then, from this, these numbers will be determined to say, we're going to sell £100,000 worth of stock this month, and it will be made up of these things. That in turn allows your manufacturing or supply chain to become geared up to be able to achieve those numbers of items for you to sell. Because if you don't join the dots between all of these, you're going to get the mess we've got, or the problem due to other issues. But the problem here is that we must tie the whole lot together. We're always going to get the wild cards like we're experiencing at the moment with the COVID and the exit of Brexit situation. But we need to give it our best shot. The more we can do this, the better the result. What I would say ultimately is you're never going to get this perfect. But the more you put in it as your stab in the dark, which is what it comes down to, the more it's going to help you move forward. So this is where I would start from with this document. Once you've created it, then we need to just look at it from this point of view. I always like customers to do this. is to consider where you're at. Now, I've put on here about, I'll trip over the cable. What's your minimum sales limit? So let's look at it this way. So we've got money in here, got time in there. Oops. You've projected you're going to do that. Okay, and that's great. Gives you all the numbers you want. But what we mustn't do is lose sight of the limitations. So for instance, you're going to have a break even. If you don't achieve break even, you're running at a loss. But conversely, you're also going to have a maximum capacity that you could cope with. What's going to cause that? Well, if you manufacture, there'll be a limit to how much you can actually manufacture. If you're doing a service, there will be a limited number of headcount that you can get hold of to actually do that service. If you're in construction and you're doing cladding on a building, as we were talking previously, there will be a limit to how much material you reckon you can get hold of. So actually, it might be a lot higher, but there will be a maximum, max potential. And if you were to go over that, that also could be dangerous. So here we are. If we go through the year, we're not going to follow that line exactly. And let's take an example. We start off and we dip below our break-even line. We need to be prepared for what we do if this happens. If it's a new product, do we can it? If it's a new product, how much time have we allowed ourselves to run at a loss before it becomes profitable? We need to have a kind of a rule book to apply. Equally so, if the sales then take off, it's so tempting to say, oh, let's just wet the orders and then we'll fill it. But of course, the danger is if you start upsetting customers by not delivering, you could end up with losing customers, and what you'll do is you'll come up here and then it's going to tail off and go down again. So the break even, or I would say minimum you're prepared to accept, is better than break even, or the maximum potential that you could cope with are very useful things for you to bear in mind. So capacity wise, you can think of obvious things: manpower, materials, space. Have you got room to carry the stock? And cash flow, because growth takes money. They're the obvious ones off the top of my head. The final thing to look at here is to do with the sales side of things. Setting the sales targets. Now, from experience, what happens in a sales team is they chase their targets. If they start to achieve their targets, they start to back off. So let me tell you a true story. This company I started working with was struggling to make money. And the guy running it had set, it was a fairly new business, but it was reasonable turnover, in excess of $1 million. And what he'd done was, he had done what seemed logical at the time. And he had defined his break even as his target. And what would happen for him was this. His sales team had achieved sales which had done something like this. And I said, what made you set break even as a target? And not illogically, he said, oh, well, I thought if I set that, anything more from that is cream on the cake. So I said, yeah, but I can see from this, your sales team is achieving the target. They're not struggling to achieve this target. So he said, well, yeah, I see what you mean, but what do I do about it? So I said, well, what have you got to lose by upping the target? They're only going to miss it. So what he did was he increased it by 15%. The really interesting thing here was what happened next. So the sales did this. So my advice to you is this. Don't set your sales target the same as your budget figures. Put it up a few percent. Put it up enough that the variability in this wobbly sales input line is going to be comfortably over your target line. And I know it sounds stupid, but I've seen it so many times that this actually is a true situation. So I hope that's useful to you. I hope that joins the dots between the 12-month plan and the 90-day plan. It makes you think about the detail of what you've physically got to do to join those two together. Good luck with it.